this podcast, we're going to go over how to name amines using the IUPAC naming system. All right, first and foremost, it's important to note that for once, we do not use the IUPAC naming system for amines as much as we use the common naming system for amines. So most of the time, you're going to see amines named using the common system. But here are the rules to name them using the IUPAC system. You're going to start by finding the parent chain, the longest carbon chain that contains the nitrogen. You're going to take that parent alkane name, remove the E, and add the word amine. You're going to also number the chain to show the position of the amine group. It's not necessarily going to be on the end. It can be in the middle of the chain. And you're also going to number any branches. Obviously, we're going to give priority to that nitrogen for the lowest number possible. When you have secondary and tertiary amines, the largest alkyl group attached to the nitrogen is your parent chain. So in IUPAC, we find the longest alkyl group, we make that the parent, and then we're going to name those smaller branches coming off of the amine as branches. We're going to list them alphabetically, and we're going to use N to tell us, instead of numbering it, that these alkyl branches or any branches are coming off of the nitrogen specifically. All right, so I know those rules were a lot to remember, but before we start practicing those, we're going to add in a couple extra ideas and we'll practice it all together. Just like in alcohol, having two hydroxyl groups is called a diol, we can also have an amine that has two nitrogens in it, and we would consider that to be a diamine. Two notable examples of diamines are putrescine, which is right here. It is a 1, 2, 3, 4 carbon diamine, and cadaverine, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbon diamine. These guys are pretty gross. These guys are responsible for the smell. Putrescine is responsible for the smell of rotting and decaying flesh, and cadaverine is what gives cadavers that noticeable smell, that smell that I'm sure you're smelling a little bit of, despite all of that embalming fluid that they use in anatomy and physiology lab. NH2 can also be named as a branch, and we don't talk a lot about what happens when you have multiple families represented or multiple functional groups. This is something that we will practice a little bit in our guided practice, but if you have another branch that is a higher priority, and I'm going to go ahead and put up the priority list right here. If you have another branch present, you're going to name that as that branch, and then you're going to name the nitrogen or the amine as being an amino branch. So amines have the lowest priority of what we have looked at so far. They're lower than alcohol. That means, and I'm going to go ahead and name this right now so we get an idea for it, that we have 1 propanol. So that covers this 3 carbon alcohol. And then we have an amino group coming off of these second carbons. So this would be 2 amino, 1 propanol. So again, you're going to get more practice with this, but because amines are such low priority, we do see them named as amino branches more often than any of the other functional groups. All right, let's go ahead and do some examples. We'll start with some of the more basic ones. So in the upper right-hand corner, and again, if you think you got this, pause me, check in with me, check your answers. We're going to find the longest chain that includes the nitrogen, which is right here, 1, 2, 3, 4. So our parent chain has an amine in the 1 position. We're going to give it priority over anything else. The parent alkane is butane, but I'm going to go ahead and remove the E off of that and replace it with the word amine. So the parent chain is 1 butanamine. We then need to name the branch coming off of the 3rd carbon. So this would be 3 methyl 1 butanamine. All right, in our next example, in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, here we're going to have to find the longest alkyl group attached to the amine. We're going to name that as our parent chain. So this is going to be our parent chain. It's 1, 2, 3 carbons long. So we are going to give it the name, and I'm going to kind of write down here, propanamine. That nitrogen group can be either in the 1 or 2 positions, so I do have to number that. This is 1 propanamine. Now, I am going to name these alkyl groups as branches, but because they're not coming off of the carbons, we don't number them. Instead, we're going to use N to say that this methyl group is coming off of the nitrogen. It's directly attached to that. So I have two methyl groups, so I'm going to have to say dimethyl, and I'm going to have to address that both are coming off of the nitrogen. So this is NN-dimethyl-1 propanamine. This gets kind of funky, but just treat those N's like numbers. If they're both coming off of N, it's okay to say NN, but if you have two of them, you have to address that each of them are coming off of that nitrogen. All right, in the upper right-hand corner, we have an example where we have two different functional groups. We have a carboxylic acid, and we also have an amine. Well, if I were to flip back through my notes, I know that carboxylic acids are going to have a higher priority than amines. So I'm going to name the amine as an amino group as a branch. So we're going to go back in time, and we're going to name this as being a 1, 2, 3, 4 carbon carboxylic acid. So butane becomes butanoic acid. I don't have to number this because your carboxylate group is always on the end. So that takes care of our longest chain. Now I have to address this amino branch coming off of carbon number 3. So this would be 3-amino butanoic acid. This would be one word, but I didn't plan that very well. All right. In our last example, we have two nitrogen groups. So this is definitely going to be a diamine. We're going to start with the longest chain first. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have butane. We don't drop the E on these. Diamine. And we're going to have to label the positions of those amino groups. So we have one on position 1 and coming off of carbon 4. So this would be 1, 4 butane diamine. You're not going to see a lot of diamines on your exam that you're going to have to name. I would expect the other 3 examples to come up, but we're going to keep it pretty simple when it comes to multiple functional groups in the same name.